In this lesson, we are going to talk about probably one of the most important service of Azure, that is Azure Active Directory, AAD. And this is Identity and Access Management Service. So this manage your identity and access. Now let's look at what is this. So for example, let's say you are a user and you try to access different applications. For example, Microsoft Office 365 applications like Power BI, SharePoint, Teams, and so on. Or otherwise, anyway, you have logged in into your Azure, right? So when you log in, you provide your user ID and password. What is the service behind the scene which authenticate you, which verify you as a person, which verify your user ID and password? That is Azure Active Directory, right? So Azure Active Directory is identity and access management service. This manage your identity, your username, your password. And if you like, you can add more information like your job title, your address, your phone number, and so on, right? And identity not just mean user. This can also mean, for example, user, maybe organization, maybe some kind of application, right? So for example, let's say you have data factory and this data factory is trying to access database. Forget about what is data factory. This is just one application, for example. And this application is trying to access another application. Now this application also needs to authenticate itself, right? And this can also be done using Azure Active Directory, right? Now let me jump to the portal very quickly. So right now I'm inside the Azure portal, and on the left hand side, if I go to all services under identity, I can see this service Azure Active Directory. You can always search this service within the search bar. So let me open this service here. And now here you can see that this can manage users, right? Groups. So you can make different groups of users. For example, you can put all the users of development team into one group. All the users of administrator, for example, those who have administrator right, into another group. It can manage devices. You can registration apps here, right? It has licenses. It can do the password reset, another user settings, security related stuff, single sign-on. Now forget about what are all these. We'll discuss some of these in the upcoming lessons. But the point here I'm trying to put is Azure Active Directory not just manage users. This has much more capability. This has many more features, right? So this is very powerful service. This is the central service used by all the other Azure resources. All right. Now let me jump back to my slides here. So let's quickly see what we have discussed so far. Azure Active Directory helps your employees to sign in and access resources. This is very simple definition, right? Now, user information like your ID, your password, it can be your email ID, address, your job title, and so many other informations. All of this can be stored within Azure Active Directory, right? And this identity, as we discussed, is not just users. It can also be in applications. And every day, Microsoft says that Azure Active Directory manage 1.2 billion identities. So this is huge. This is a big service, you can imagine, right? Now I want to introduce another term here, that is tenant. What is tenant? Tenant represent organization. So tenant is equal to organization. So for example, let's say as a user or maybe as an organization, you have created your Azure account, right? Now, when you create your Azure account, Azure by default create a tenant for you, right? And this tenant has one-to-one relationship with Azure Active Directory, right? And under this tenant, you can create different users. For example, user 1, user 2, and basically you can create different users. You can organize these users into different group. You can give them different permissions and access. Basically, you manage your organization, your tenant. Now tomorrow, let's say you want to open another company, another organization. So you can create one more tenant here, right? And when you will create this new tenant, Azure will create another instance of Azure Active Directory. So for example, this is Azure Active Directory 1. This will be Azure Active Directory 2. And then you can create more users under this tenant. And both of these will be completely isolated, right? So these users and these users have completely separate management. They have completely separate Azure Active Directory. So as I said, tenant is automatically created when your organization sign up for Microsoft, right? So it's automatically created. And the tenant means single instance of Azure Active Directory. So one tenant and one Azure Active Directory, they both have one-to-one relationship. Every tenant has a single Azure Active Directory, and this represents an organization, right? Single organization. Now, tenant and directory are often used interchangeably. Now, in the portal and even in the documents, Microsoft Documents, tenant, Azure Active Directory, and sometimes even directory, these words use interchangeably. But at this stage, for all practical purpose, you can imagine tenant, Azure Active Directory, and directory as the same thing. All right. Now, let me jump back to my portal once again. And if you see that I'm inside the Azure Active Directory, and I can click on Manage Tenants here. And you can see that I have this default directory, which was created when I created my Azure account. And this was the another tenant which I created later. So basically, I have two organizations as of now, right? And each of these has a separate Azure Active Directory instance connected with this one-to-one. Now let me create one more tenant. So let me click on create here, and I can choose Azure Active Directory. Now business to consumer, B2C, is a completely separate thing. This is not part of Azure Active Directory. So forget about this. We'll discuss about this later. So let's choose Azure Active Directory and click on configuration, right? And now here I need to provide name of my organization. So let's say I can say Cloud Gita 3. All right. And I need to provide domain. So this will be cloudgita3.onmicrosoft.com, and we have to choose the primary location for our organization. I will click on review and create. Now validation has been passed. I will click on create here, and I need to provide a code here. So for example, I can say 4MDPP, and let me submit this. This will take few minutes, and this will create a new tenant, new instance of Azure Active Directory for me. All right. So I'll come back as soon as this process completes. All right, so maybe after 30 seconds, I can see that tenant creation was successful. I will just close this, and let me go back to my default directory, or even let me click on manage tenants here. And now here you can see that I have another tenant, Cloud Gita 3. Now what I can do, if I want to use this tenant or this organization, I will select this and I will click on switch. And now you can see that this has shifted to Cloud Gita 3. So this is the new organization, and once again this has created the new instance of Azure Active Directory. So if I open this in another tab, I want to open my previous tenant also. So for that, let me go to manage tenants here. I will click my primary tenant here, and I will click on switch. So now this will open my previous default directory here, and if I go to users here, you can see that in my previous, the default directory, I have 2 users, but in this new tenant which I have just created, if I go to user here, you can see that I only have one primary user through which we have created this tenant, right? So there's a complete separate management of users. I want to show you here. Basically, this is a separate instance of Azure Active Directory, right? So both of these are isolated. All right, so I hope now you have a fair understanding about the fundamentals of Azure Active Directory. Actually, there's a lot we can discuss about Azure Active Directory, and in this module we are going to discuss some of the very important and prominent features of Azure Active Directory. But actually this topic deserves a complete separate course in itself. But anyway, we are going to touch upon all the important points required in this module. So I'll see you in the next lesson. Thank you so much.